morning. Welcome to the China Future Tech webinar hosted by the South China Morning Post. And today's theme is how the rise of China's civilian aerospace is reshaping global skies. We have invited SCMP senior reporter Frank Chen, who follows every move in China's aircraft sector, and Jason Li Hanming, an independent civil aviation analyst who teaches this trade at 2 campuses in China. Our third panelist is William Zheng, and he is a senior correspondent on the Post China desk. I'm Ralph Jennings, an economy news correspondent at the SCMP. I would also like to let our readers know that we've launched a special section on the SCMP website called China Future Tech. You can use it to find SCMP coverage of 6 crucial industries, namely electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, robotics, aerospace, and biomedicine. Airbus and Boeing have long dominated the market for large passenger aircraft, including in China. Both of these huge Western manufacturers bank on China needing around 9,000 planes over the next 2 decades for passenger demand. Here's where it gets interesting. China started an effort 2 years ago to supply its own large planes with the maiden flight of its first homegrown single-aisle jet, the C919. Now the state-run manufacturer, Commercial Aviation Corporation of China, which is better known as just COMAC, is working on hundreds of orders for the nation's biggest 3 airlines. However, the C919 still depends heavily on key foreign-made parts, and no aviation regulator outside of China has given the jet permission to use its airspace. Just 18 planes are flying inside of China. Our 3 experts will explain whether it's a smooth flight ahead. So, solid aerospace technology obviously underpins this Chinese aircraft maker's ultimate success, whether it's inside of China or on the outside. On that note, we have a question from a reader who wants to know how special the C919 actually is in terms of technology. So, could you tell us in what ways this aircraft is really a piece of innovation, or is it more like something that was inspired by existing models made by Airbus and Boeing? We'll go to you in the mainland. Frank, what do you think?
Well, thanks, Rob. I think that the C919 is more of a gradual iteration of existing models based on a very mature, time-tested design already used by Western plane makers. So it's not any kind of drastic redesign of a narrow-body aircraft type. It's based on a mature design incorporating all the systems equipment also found on Airbus A320 or Boeing 737, supplied by mainstream Western suppliers, aviation companies. So I think this is a logical, realistic decision made by COMAC to shorten R&D time to save money. But in the meantime, a Chinese aircraft based on a mature mainstream design already seen for decades, it should be easier to get certified by a Western regulator, and it should be familiar to operate, should be simple, should be as smooth to be surfaced, to be maintained as other mainstream aircraft types. So I think it's a sensible, logical decision made by COMAC.
So based on existing technology perfected by Western aircraft manufacturers, Jason, what do you think? Is this true, or is there something more innovative than that?
Okay, so actually the whole design of C919 is more like you have to be the system integrator and combine all the things together in order to make a business profitable, practicable, and reliable aircraft. So that's the reason I still consider it as kind of innovation, because it is a large step for those Chinese people eventually to figure out how to combine all the parts together in order to get this thing down. So I would like to describe it more like it's more like they are still learning, they are starting how to bring the thing together, and it's a very first step. And eventually, after they figure out how to integrate everything together, it will allow more space for Chinese people to put their innovation inside. For example, just take the aircraft engine as example. You can see that currently they use the one from General Electric, but you do see that they have made in China engine that is going to be developed, and once it is ready, it could be just integrated into the COMAC aircraft. So it's more like a platform. That's the same thing happened to Boeing or Airbus. For example, as you see that when General Electric or Rolls-Royce develop a new kind of engine, it is Boeing and Airbus that put it onto the platform that could be integrated.
Right. So China, back in 2007, identified large aircraft as a national development strategy.
Yeah.
Looking back at the past 18 years since then, how does China now see large aircraft? Is it even more of a development strategy, or have they pulled back a little bit? Jason, go ahead.
Exactly.
On that one.
That's at least the same or even more important. One of the most important change since these 18 years is the independence of the Aero Engine Corporation of China. So they want to say that we got two manufacturers, one for the fuselage while the other for the engines. That actually emphasized Chinese consider over bringing more competition into the market so that they have more competition, they have actually more benefits for the consumers around the world.
William, you agree with that?
I totally agree, but I would like to just bring our historical horizon a little bit further back.
Yeah.
In fact, China did not start its dream on big airplanes at 2005. In fact, we can stretch it even further. Actually, China started its dream on a bigger airplane right towards the end of the Cultural Revolution in the 1970s.
1979 of 运十.
Y-10. There is still a plane of Y-10 that's parked
In Shanghai.
somewhere in Shanghai,
Yeah.
as a monument of China's first failed attempt.
The COMAC campus up there.
Yes, and it's a first attempt that failed because China's industrial capability wasn't there, and China realized that it's impractical to go for it.
Yeah.
So it's only until 2005. If you remember, there's a famous quote by former China Commerce Minister Bo Xilai then. He said that China have to sell 800 million shirts to buy an Airbus. Yeah. So that shows a very strong desire on a continued desire to climb up the value chain, the industrial chain. And there is another very important part is the Chinese airliner has been always complaining that it's very expensive to run and maintain the Western engine, Western airplanes.
Aircraft engines whatsoever.
And some even complain to us that even one screw costs $15 US.
Exactly.
Is there any way that we can cut it down? So can we make it locally and all that? That's a combined desire. At the perspective of a national strategy, I think for now, it is even more important for China to make it a success because the aerospace industry has a very long supply chain. It is identified as an industry that can produce lots of good jobs, high quality jobs. And it also can have lots of downstream companies that will generate a lot of GDPs.
Yeah, even
And
the screw maker benefit from it because they can
Yes.
sell the screw for $50.
Or it might be
Yes.
15
Or
grand
even half of
instead,
the
right?
price.
Yeah, even half of that will be
If
quite
that.
sufficient.
And more importantly, China now is engaging in the tech war with the US. It's trying to do a lot of indigenous research and R&D. So I think big airplane is one of the main projects that can help with a lot of such R&Ds in new material science, aerospace engineering, and new electronics, and you name it. Basically, that China have to learn a lot of new things by itself.
It will be quite a network of all the kinds of suppliers.
Yes, I would say the least mentioned factor, because China has not been very open or very blunt on this point, is the security part. If you still remember years ago, the then President Jiang Zemin's airplane was found to have about 27 bugs in his Boeing. So of course, China has an elephant's memory. that kind of memory will lingers on. Of course, from a supply chain safety point of view, from aerospace security point of view, they will probably all want to have a China-made jetliner.
So going back to this idea of a tech war between China and the US, as you just mentioned, William, it's my understanding that COMAC and China as a whole hope that these COMAC aircraft models can really compete with similar stuff coming out of Airbus and Boeing. Why would this competitive spirit be so strong?
Again, let me, as a China politics junkie, I very often read the memoirs of the old revolutionary old guards, basically. One thing that struck me very strongly was, at that time, China was really short of US dollar. And they have been trying to spend it as little as possible. And I think it became a very entrenched mindset within China that, can we do that ourselves? Can we save our US dollar reserves? And that's how China managed to build such a huge reserve. And it is the mindset of, can we do it ourselves? And there is another thing, very interestingly, politically, China runs a top-down party state system, right? So whenever it became a national project, and whoever is able to execute the project successfully will accumulate a huge political capital. We are seeing that lots of former engineers or top designers of China's J-20
aerospace
has been elevated to the political ladder. And even further, I would say for the China's local government, this is a big gain for them, because a national project means a lot of budget, trillions of dollars. So if let's say a province is able to have a bite on this, it means lots of GDP can be generated.
And engineering works, there are so many things. For example, that's when competing, that's based on quite a straightforward logic. If somebody else can do it, why not? Why we can't? That's quite a straightforward one. And you can tell from that the large market, no matter domestically or internationally, made this. So definitely it will be a quite straightforward logic that let's bring some competition, push down the price, and eventually earn some money from it. Yeah, it's something quite straightforward. And when talking about the tech war, it's more like that. For example, you have so many college graduates graduating from university every year. They do about millions of people. That will be quite a challenge to the industry or the employment market in order to provide them with some, what they call good quality jobs. So definitely you can see that as the future tech tells everyone that China is expanding on almost every different aspect of the industry. And the aerospace one is definitely one of the most targeted section. For example, nowadays just surrounding the COMAC in Shanghai, you do find so many startups. They have so many startups in the Yangtze River Delta. Just work at this COMAC supplier, supply different kind of electronic material, so many different things to it.
It has its own supply chain, basically.
Yeah, that actually brings the whole ecosystem surrounding it. And this kind of technology startups actually created more opportunity for other industry, for example, like the automobile. Because you do see that most of the materials that you could use on the aircraft are actually able to use on automobile too, or vice versa. So that brings the whole ecosystem and eventually benefits everybody in the region. For example, like the Shanghai's government, or engineers living there, or the companies, data investors, so many people. Yeah.
So a lot of us have noticed that China's high-speed rail system expanded really, really fast. So we have a question about whether China can also apply modern technology at scale to make its large aircraft sector grow just as fast and basically leapfrog over the competitors overseas that have been doing this for decades. What do you think?
So the high-speed railway system and the aircraft are kind of different stories. One of the most important thing about the high-speed railway is that there are only one decision maker, which is the China Railway. So once if it is set up some kind of standard, it will be kind of quickly pushing the thing. And another thing about high-speed railway is that it's auto from the scratch. So you can build the infrastructure from the very beginning, you can design it well for the new systems, but aerospace is not. The typical characteristic of aerospace is that you are actually moving inside a pre-built system. You have so many different decision makers, like the regulators surrounding the region, so many different countries, and you have so many current engineers, for example, like the suppliers engineer, your airlines engineer, and so on. So you have the train that you have to negotiate with them in order to get them familiar with your new aircraft. But in railway, that's a different story. You only have one decision maker. And another thing is about that the railway is more like in a control environment. By the control, I mean that it just runs on the ground. So it will be slightly more simpler than the aircraft, which is usually operating in a quite complex or, more difficult to predict environment.
William, trains versus planes.
Jason has said about all the differences. I will probably look at a bit of the similarities between these two. After all, the logic behind it is always the same. Where number one, China is trading its vast market for technologies. It's just how it want to trade it and trade it with who, and how can China quickly adapt and learn, localize these technologies. Number two, I think they are both addressing existing marketplace. While like Jason rightfully pointed out, when China embarked on the speed rail, the system is not there, but the blueprint is there. And everyone can see that that's going to be a huge market. While in China, this market now is already there, where single aisle airplanes are sold probably in China 100 to 200 a year. This is already addressable market space for COMAC. And I would say the final thing is China's political system and economic system, where it can mobilize the nation's resources towards something that's been titled as a national strategy, would still be the same, where you will see Beijing channeling all the top brains, finding the right suppliers and coordinating. Although the coordination is indeed much more difficult because it involves a lot more players in this round, but I think largely Beijing will still help COMAC to coordinate lots of such things.
Exactly. Oh, by the way, there's another difference. The reason why China's high-speed railways are pushed so fast is that when you are building a high-speed railway line, you're actually moving the passenger train from the current line to the new line. So you actually have space on the current line for the freighter train. And in China, using trains to carry freights or cargoes are actually a well-proven lucrative market. So if you move one from there, you have something able for the cargo that's already lucrative. So it has been well proven. But when talking about the aircraft, well, using aircraft to carry cargo is at least not so lucrative domestically. You have strong competition. So that's a difference, because on the railway system, that's a well-proven lucrative business, so that you can see that when they come for money, that will be such a fast pace. But on the aerospace, it's still something to be proven.
And I would just add one more thing is I think they will share a very similar challenge. That's to prove that you are safe. Where did you remember after the collision of the
733
in 2011, China has to halt,
slow the thing down.
Slow down and re-examine what went wrong and put in all the safety measures before we move on. I think for now, COMAC also need to demonstrate such long, solid safety record before it can claim itself as an established player.
It's a progress of proving themselves.
Yes.
And I understand
may I add that actually someone has jokingly compared developing an airliner to building a nuclear reactor. So on that note, then a high-speed railway train can just be a AAA battery. But China does want to replicate the successful experience, its model, how it achieved its success when building the world's longest high-speed railway network. China started out learning from the technology, the operation experience from Germany, Germany's DB or Japan's Senkansang, or from France. And then China started gradually developing its indigenous alternatives and then gradually roll out to replace the foreign parts. China certainly does want to replicate that experience on the C919, C929 programs. But it really takes time, and it's far, far more complicated.
So sticking with the theme of parts, thank you for mentioning that, Frank. How should COMAC go about developing a global network of supplies, components, and maintenance, given that we're in a very, very complex global trade environment at the moment? And as a side question to that, should Russia, which has its own aerospace legacy, be particularly keen to help China, and the governments get along pretty well? So, Russia? Go ahead, Frank.
Well, I suspect that any Russian contribution can be a heavy luggage for the C919, C929, especially if they want to genuinely seek overseas Western certification endorsement. The CR919, 929 project ended after the Ukraine war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I don't think there will be any substantial, significant role that Russia can play in this regard. But when it comes to how COMAC can expand its overseas sales network, service maintenance network, or supply help airlines overseas virus surface their planes, I think it has a pretty long way to go. But it is taking some baby steps in Southeast Asia, right? We know that COMAC has opened a regional office in Singapore, and there is a COMAC team on the ground in Indonesia, helping the local budget carrier Transnusa to operate a number of C909 regional jets. And there are speculations, there are obviously hope that the Transnusa could buy the first C919, and the Chinese, the COMAC team is already there. So Southeast Asia can be the first proving ground for COMAC when it tries to spread its tentacles overseas. But realistically, I don't think that it will be able to expand its network elsewhere. It really takes time, and it's hugely expensive.
So Jason, tell us about components and maintenance in the context of a very severe, dire global trade environment. What can COMAC really do? Can they source their parts all domestically? Can they get it from friendly countries? And then we have the Russia factor again.
Okay, so let's talk about very first one, the components. So you can see that COMAC's gradually expanding the market rather than building from scratch. So at the very initial time, you can see that they're expanding their network from Shanghai. Yeah, with China Eastern operated for a while, so that you only have set up one component base. And then they grow up to Guangzhou and Beijing for all the domestic three. And eventually they get coverage over the whole China. Well, the next step, when they're expanding into Southeast Asia, you can see that they have very first carriers that set up one component storage, and later the second, and so on. That will be a gradual one, because the most important thing about maintenance is about the engineering or the engineering team. So you have to spend some time training the technicians and the engineers, no matter dispatch Chinese people to there or training local people. You have to gradually build up a team. That's the most important factor when building. But training people is something that can exponentially grow. So for example, if Ralph, you train me, I can train 2, and 2 become 4. That's how it grows. So you can see that it's actually growing much faster in a much faster pace from the very beginning side when they have only one, and now you can see that they are covering the whole China, and eventually they will just cover Southeast Asia as they grow the customer network there. So now let's talk about Russian. The Russian engine or every Russian component, the key factor is more like the economy. So just like what I said before, it's not the aircraft manufacturer determine what kind of technology to use, it is eventually the air travelers, because they compare the price, and every airlines compare for the fuel price, fuel economy, and they say that, okay, this one is much fuel efficient, so let's choose this one, but not the other. So when talking about the Russian engine or other Russian technology, the key disadvantage is that they are fuel costly. That's will be the very key factors. That's the same story why C919 does not take the Chinese engine at the very first stage. Yeah, it is not about the availability. For example, you can procure Russian engines, or you can procure those made in China engines, but once we install it, then the airliners will say that we'll put a question mark on it, say, I'm questioning about the fuel efficiency. Yeah, that's the most important factor.
So putting a kind of a gloomier face on this question, suppose that due to trade disputes, COMAC can't get some crucial parts that it needs from the United States. How is that going to affect production, schedules, and prices paid by the airlines to COMAC for deliveries? And at what point can China just quit depending on the US for these parts?
Okay, so let's from the first one. So on the delivery of COMAC, that actually they do have some impacts. That definitely, because you do see an unclear future regarding the negotiation between China and the US on the trade war or the tech ban. You do see that they have several meetings around the world in order to just quarrel for it or negotiate for it. That's the very first thing. So there are uncertainties over the delivery and the price over it. We're talking about second one, the replacement of foreign parts with Chinese parts. So as I told you before, there are a company named Aero Engine Corporation of China, or we call it 中国航发. They are working on the made in China jet engines. They actually got a line of different kind of engine that is widely used on military aircraft, like the Yun 20, Yun 20. So it's what they call the Washan turbo engine 20 that operate on military aircraft. Washan 20 or Washan 20 is actually something could be used on C919, but it is just fuel costly. So what the AECC or the Aero Engine Corporation are working on is their next generation engine called the Changjiang 1000A. It is a more civilian use one. It is more fuel efficient and could be put on the C919 for it. So Changjiang 1000 is generally available right now. They have finalized the design. All they need is that they have to get approval from the regulatory authorities in order to integrate it with the C9191. Changing an engine is quite something, take a lot of labors and take a lot of work in order to finally integrate this thing together. So it takes time.
Frank, what happens if COMAC can't get these engines from the US?
Well, I think COMAC certainly hopes it can continue to buy those key components from the US and broadly Western suppliers. Realistically, I don't think that COMAC will ever thinking about replacing, swapping out all these Western components for homegrown ones or for on any massive scale, because Jason has just mentioned that these Chinese components, these Chinese alternatives, they are yet to come to parity with Western products in terms of fuel efficiency, in terms of reliability. It appears that there could be some manufacturing bottlenecks. And for the sake of getting Western certification, getting the safety endorsement from the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, I think it's a more realistic and wiser choice for COMAC to continue to use these critical Western components, including engines, right? But certainly it has been viewed by some Chinese officials, Chinese people as a vulnerability. But the fact is that, global aviation, airplane manufacturing, they incorporate parts from all over the world. Even for smartphones, we have components from all over the world. So it's
normal business, isn't it?
Yeah.
Indeed.
Ralph,
William, go ahead.
May I just add a little bit why China now at when you look at C919, it adopts a very open attitude on global supply chain. It was exactly because its venture on Y10 taught them a very steep lesson of China can't do it itself.
Yeah.
And it needs the suppliers from the world, and it can easily blend in with the world, which make C919 much easier to be put together in China. So I think China's mentality it's not so strong on we want to build the whole thing in China. That's probably not it's a very daunting task. And I think Beijing has not openly said that I'm going to produce everything here, but instead Beijing has tried to be the integrator of a global supply chain that China will be like the Apple per se. It will give you the blueprints, and all the suppliers will have to supply according to Beijing's specs and make Beijing the leader of the industry. But obviously, I think in the case of C919, they are not going to cut out the world's supplies, at least for the very near future. Yeah.
Frank, you have extensively covered not only the C919, but also the next generation, if I may call it that, the C929, and we've even given mention in our coverage to the C939. Can we expect any more? Is there a C949 or anything like that coming? And what about the 929 and the 939? Can you give us a sense of the timelines we should expect?
Well, the South China Morning Post has run a story about the supersonic C949 some time ago. So I do believe that while investing pouring most of the resources and energy into the C919 and C929 programs, I think COMAC has been sketching out some future models. But just like, those car makers, they like to roll out some futuristic, quite cutting edge conceptual marks, but their main focus is to make sales of their mainstream existing models series. So I think the focus for the for COMAC will still remain on the C919 and the C929 for the foreseeable future. It's logical. It makes sense for them because the global aviation industry, airlines, they are retiring these jumbo jets. They are focusing more on this middle-sized twin aisle jets and predominantly narrow-body jets. So it makes business sense for COMAC to do so. I even suspect if COMAC really wants to do the C939 or C949, I think it could be politically motivated. It won't make too much sense, at least for the time being and for the foreseeable future. So there could be some conceptual launches of future models, but I don't think that there will make any commercial impact, any commercial sense for the time being.
Jason, what do you think? 939, 49, 59, 69?
That would be quite a too long story.
When can we fly out these things?
So the thing happens right now. So if you look at the global market, you do see a narrow body will be the largest piece because there are so many domestic routes requires it. And if you look at the medium-sized wide body, you do see that it shrinks. And for the large side wide body, it shrinks even more. It's just like pyramid. You do see that the regional jet and narrow body are most widely used, and every time when they step up, it gets narrow. Eventually, it's the Concorde or supersonic one. So, COMAC definitely they are discussing the possibility of having even larger aircraft or supersonic aircraft, but that will take quite a long time for them to finalize the idea. So as far as I know, they are mostly focused on either selling the C919 or putting the necessary technology advancement, for example, in case of replacing the engine. And they are putting some efforts from the C929, which will be the same as the Boeing 787 or Airbus A330, because that's another thing China is widely used for the domestic and short-haul international market. So they are definitely, when it comes to the decision making, it is always out of the actual demands of the market rather than the technological thoughts or the pure innovation rather than the market-driven innovations.
And speaking of market demands, we know that the big three state-owned carriers in China have placed numerous orders for the C919. Who offshore, outside of mainland China, would be most likely to either lease or buy these same aircraft? Go ahead.
I do remember that currently there are more Southeast Asia-based one that is looking for it. And for example, you do see one company in Brunei, they are leasing for it. They're leasing some C919 for the tests. And currently the most attracting products of COMAC in Southeast Asia is still the ARJ21 or C909, because regional jets, if you look at the map of Southeast Asia, you do find that there's so many islands there, and it will be quite a strong demand for the regional jet to fly just between the islands instead of taking the boats. And if you even look at the continental Southeast Asia, like the Vietnam or Thailand, you can find that there are not so much land transportation infrastructure. For example, from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City, they don't have the high-speed railway, so they are highly demand for a cheap, reliable, affordable regional jet for the domestic operations. So you can see that that's the reason why Vietjet, the low-cost carrier in Vietnam, they whitelist some C909 from Chengdu Airlines in order to test it. That's actually the most, they're starting from it. That is actually something wished by the COMAC too, because rather than the C919, C909 is an aircraft which is fully tested in China for about a decade. Since the very beginning, the maiden flight in about 2015 or 2016. So it is more well-tested, more proven to be something that is affordable or reliable. And they're still testing C919 in the domestic market. So you can see that they're gathering experience about the actual usage domestically so that they can prove to foreign customer about it.
Right.
Yeah, so I think probably the very first overseas order will be in around 2026 or 2027 after 5 years of initial operation.
Frank, do you envision the C919 being bought or leased around Southeast Asia so we can make that 2-hour flight from Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City or fly across the whole Indonesian archipelago?
Yeah, that could be possible. Since there are already C909 regional jets flying there from Indonesia to some other neighboring countries, and flying from Indonesia to China to Guangzhou.
Yeah.
I think gradually we will see more, even first the C919 flying in Southeast Asia. But beyond Southeast Asia, I think it really boils down to when the C919 can be certified by Europe. I think that's the prerequisite for any overseas sales beyond Southeast Asia. Hong Kong can be interesting in this regard because China Eastern has been using a C919 on a Shanghai-Hong Kong route. It's a regular service. And Cathay Pacific already said earlier this year that it is looking at a possible stretched version of the C919 because Cathay is using bigger, longer narrow bodies for medium to short haul flights serving mainland China or probably Southeast Asia. There are some 1 or 2 European carriers. They are looking at the C919, but as Jason just said, C919 probably needs 2 to 5 years more time to demonstrate its reliability. And most importantly, during this process, COMAC works with Europe for the certification for the C919, the Chinese airliner needs to prove that it can make a profit for those operators outside mainland China, because there could be some political responsibility for mainland Chinese carriers to buy these Chinese homegrown jets, but it really boils down to its profitability, outlook, potential when foreign buyers weigh these options. And also, may I add a bit more to a previous question about Comac's future models? Comac has probably has learned the lesson when Airbus A380 program fails spectacularly. And when the 747 is reaching the end of its life, there are fewer and fewer 747 passenger airliners still flying. So I think Comac, well, it's first and foremost a business entity. It needs to make money. It has to make sensible business decisions. So it will promote some futuristic models, but the focus will still be on the C919 and C929.
So suppose that the Comac can't get any certification outside of China. Does the Chinese domestic market have enough going for it to satisfy any benchmarks that the government might have in terms of technological advances, economic returns, or even just something that they can hold up to the public and say, we've achieved this? William?
I would say Comac is born with a silver spoon on his mouth. Overall, Comac has openly said that it has already around 1,000 bookings in its pocket. Come on.
That will definitely be, yeah.
Who else can claim this when the company is still in a very young stage, right?
So it's enough. They meet all the benchmarks.
That's definitely quite enough. And according to a lot of industry estimates, depending on who you're looking at, most of people say that China will add 100 to 200 airplanes every year. And if Comac is able to supply, say, 30% or 50% of that as a goal, that's good enough to sustain the company as one of the major player, not dominant player in the world, right? And there is, and Comac, I read through some of its previous estimates of China's aviation industry in the next 2 decades. They say that they estimate the market of C919 itself can grow to 10 trillion yuan. That is like 1.4 trillion US dollar. That's, I would say it's not a huge market, but that's a comfortable market.
Sustainable.
Very sustainable thing for a medium-sized or a growing aviation company to start with. While there is 4 to 5 times of China market for it to conquer, in probably like what Frank and Jason said, in the next probably 3 decades, 4 decades maybe.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it will work on the already very profitable China market.
And another thing is that the key is actually not looking for the European or American airworthiness certification. China is targeting a more strategical target that have the Chinese regulatory authorities being automatically approved by other countries. So for example, in Hong Kong, generally the CAD will say that if you got the FAA, the American one, or the EASA, the European one, then you will got some kind of approval by simpler or much more convenient procedure to get approved by Hong Kong CAD. And you can see that Chinese authority, the CAAC, is actually looking for the final target that's being accredited by other countries, for example, like the Southeast Asia countries, so that once if it is approved by the Chinese authority, it's going to be approved by all the surrounding countries. So it's actually that how the European reach the target for Airbus, because nowadays it's that if something is approved by EASA, the European authority, then it's going to be approved by like the Indonesian one or the one through a much simpler progress. So China is looking for that. And once if China get accredited by all the surrounding countries, get trusted over the regulatory on the C919, then C919 will almost automatically be accredited by the surrounding countries on the certificate to operate. That's actually branded the market for quite a while. And if we talk about domestic market, one of the key things is that China is gradually retiring the old fleet, and that will definitely be the demands. While the other thing is that despite China has a quite a large network on the eastern part, but what about western parts? The western parts is mostly, for example, like deserts and plateaus. You know, there are Qinghai and Xizang. There are all that kind of places not so suitable for large scale of railway system. But as far as I know, as far as everybody see from the recent trends of the domestic travel, you do see that there are so many people from the east coastal area traveling to the west for the senior sports, for the there are so many things to do. So there are actually some kind of business still to be fulfilled by the airlines or C919 in the Chinese domestic market. And the other thing is more like that. If you get approval by the Chinese authority, you actually not only you can fly within China, but you can also fly from China to surrounding countries. So it will be another market. For example, you can fly to the Belt and Road countries like the Central Asia. That is what happening. For example, you can see that those companies in Xinjiang are using the C909 to fly to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. That's definitely okay. And you do see that from China Southern from Guangzhou is flying C919 or ARJ21 to surrounding Southeast Asian countries. That's another applicable scenarios. So even if this kind of Chinese jets like C909 and C919 only gets approval from China, there will be still quite a large radius of location that this aircraft can fly to and from. Yeah.
So we've mentioned that the regulators surrounding China, especially Southeast Asia, as well as the airlines in this region are probably the most likely acceptors of the C919 aircraft. Does that mean, and this is a question from a reader, that the C919 is going to effectively become like the aircraft of the global south? Is the global south, to use that term, going to be using more of this aircraft because it can't get permits from Western countries' regulators? Frank.
Well, I think that first and foremost, the C919 is a narrow-body jet. It cannot fly to the west.
Okay. That would be too long.
So that would be too long. It would be too long beyond any reasonable range of a narrow-body jet. So it's natural for China to first look at Southeast Asia or even Central Asia, as Jason mentioned, to sell the C919. And that would be a whole new story when it comes to the C929, which is being designed from scratch to be a long-range twin aisle jet, and which it is intended to fly to the west or even globally. So in the future, the COMAC will definitely seek Western certification for the C929, but for the C919, I think it's yes, to some extent, it's meant for global thought, especially those Asian countries, China's neighbors. I think it's for them. Of course, the C919 is certified, is endorsed by Europe. Probably COMAC would love to sell some aircraft to European countries for some factory carriers there in Europe to fly the C919, but that's further down the road. It really depends on the certification. So realistically, for the time being, when there's still a lack of Western certification, then Southeast Asia, Central Asia, or South Asia, the subcontinent, could be a realistic potential. The buyers will be there.
William, what do you think? Is this going to be the aircraft of the global south, especially China's allies in Asia?
I would say this is an ideal aircraft that suits the world now, because we are seeing geopolitically big countries starting to look at their own sphere of influence instead of, especially in the case of America, it's definitely trying to look further or look deeper into its own sphere of interest at the Western Hemisphere, right? So China itself has never said that it's a global power. China would be quite I would say China would be quite happy to be a major power, a major regional power in Asia. So C919 itself can fly around. I think if you have the extended range, it's like 5,000 km most.
5,500.
Yeah, and that's basically serve China's
For example,
interest.
you fly from
Yeah.
Hong Kong to almost all the locations.
It's good enough.
Yeah,
So
good enough.
as long as China make it cheap, reliable, fuel efficient, I think this is the thing that serve China's interest, and it will also serve many of the developing countries, whether we call it global south or not, because Australia is actually at the south, but it's not exactly a global south
They
country.
haven't certified it yet either.
Yep, but I would definitely say that for developing countries, China usually will provide a good alternative of Western tech, as we have seen in the case of EVs, in the case of mobile phones. So if we follow that logic, probably C919 or even ARJ,
Yep.
to begin with, it's pretty good starting point to work on, because it's much cheaper. And as long as China is able to demonstrate its capability of, I can help you to maintain the airplane, maybe in tropical weather, it might need a little bit of
Yep.
this and that, and China is able to do all that, I think it will be able to convince lots of its neighbors to look at what it has to offer.
So my understanding of regulations and permits for flights and new aircraft, you're supposed to demonstrate safety. Do you
Yep.
have any reason to think that the C919 is unsafe? And if it is safe, why wouldn't the regulators give permits?
So actually, it's more like approving an aircraft is something quite serious, especially for regulating authority never get in touch with it. So for example, you have to look at the design carefully to say that if it is something good enough. And since COMAC is rather a new player, you can see that all the things regarding COMAC, even on the side of CAAC, are under quite a scrutiny. So they are looking at the thing quite carefully because they have no idea of the previous record. It's just a new graduates with without a credit. So you have to gradually build it up. But you can see that as C909, the ARJ21, build up quite a safely operation record on the design, they got getting approval from South Asian country because they realize, okay, it is something trustworthy. We can trust it. And you can see that it's just like one approve it, then will be the other. So it's the exponential theory again that you will got more and more country approving it. So that will be quite the same thing happening for C919 too, because they have to prove that this design is safe, trustworthy. That will be generally the same story, but it will be much shorter because we have the previous experience of C909.
Right. Frank, do you think that the regulators, especially in Europe, are looking at any criteria other than the C919's safety record?
Yeah, I think that just like how China would use its orders for Boeing and Airbus as a kind of diplomatic or geopolitical tool to obtain some broader objectives, I think Beijing or COMAC won't be surprised to find out that there will be political or other non-safety considerations behind the certification process. There has been a delay in the EASA's certification of the C919, even despite the fact that the C919 is not that much different from mainstream narrow-body, Western narrow-body jets. And it seems it has been 2 years since its first commercial flight in China. The operations in China has been smooth, with services being ramped up. So I think that it's always so complicated, and politics will always come into play. I think there won't be any other single product type that could be more influenced by geopolitics than an airliner, especially when China seeks to sell its homegrown indigenous jets overseas. But personally, I think previously I may think twice before flying on a C919, but having dug into its tech specifics, realizing that there was a meticulous safety assessment done by the CAC, done by the Chinese watchdog already. And given the fact that it uses Western key components like engines, like avionics, or even its landing gear is produced by a German company, I think it's not less safe. Let's put it that way. It's not less safe than these narrow bodies that you have ground used to flying. So, but as I mentioned, it's always complicated. Geopolitics will always be there. So it's complicated. But the silver lining is that even the chief of the EASA has promised that the aircraft will be certified eventually in his interview earlier this year. So, yeah, let's see.
So looking at this aircraft from a whole different vantage point, Jason, I understand you have boarded a flight on a C919. Yeah. Tell us about it. What did it look like, smell like? What sounds did you hear, especially compared to something
Okay, so actually on the narrow body one, there's not so much difference between the Boeing or Airbus on COMAC. One of the things, if to mention, is that the central seat of the C919 is wider. That will be the best thing, because it's usually, you can put it in a much relaxable way.
The B seat.
The B or E. Another thing about it is that generally on the C919, the distance between seats are wider or longer than the Airbus and the Boeing rivals. That's because that generally CAAC are more conservative about the maximum passenger carry on board. So it will be slightly more comfortable than taking the Airbus or Boeing. Yeah, slightly more comfortable, thanks for the newer design. Yeah.
And William, I know you've done the same thing. Tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I think first thing strike me as a non-tech person is the smell like a new car, right? You know the new car smell where you have this new plastic, and this is quite brand new thing, and I see no coffee stains on the carpet and all that. It's very clean, and it was flew by the Golden Phoenix crew. That was like China Eastern Airlines, the best crew, and we were served very well. And one thing I noticed was a toilet.
Yeah, the lavatory. Yeah.
The lavatory was spot clean, and I think it's a little bit futuristic, and when you walk in there, you feel like, wow, this is like a spaceship. No? And one thing I noted is probably, correct me if I'm not wrong, there are more signage in Chinese.
Definitely, that's the most significant thing.
As compared to Boeing and Airbus, I think lots of the Chinese fonts are bigger than the English fonts.
Yeah.
And one thing I love most was the at the shelf, that
the lighting control panel,
and you have a handphone stand.
Yeah.
That you can put your phone or iPad on there, and you can hook on the Wi-Fi and all this to watch your TVs, your shows.
Yeah,
it's quite convenient as compared to some of those things that they put it much lower. So it's
on the tray table.
Yeah, then you will have to bend over to watch it. I think those are the
someday
good things.
I hope to take one of these flights myself. For now, we're coming to an end of today's webinar. And thanks all for staying with us. China's tech field expects fascinating changes for the rest of 2025 and beyond. And COMAC's aircraft are just one piece of the future. Thanks again to our panelists today. For SCMP readers who are interested in China tech, please once again be reminded to follow the China Future Tech section on our website to find stories on EVs, AI, semiconductors, robotics, aerospace, and biomedicine. And for those who would like more than the usual SCMP content, please also subscribe to SCMP Plus, a feature product that provides insights and in-depth analysis of news stories. On that note, a briefing about China's passenger jet ambitions has been released exclusively on SCMP Plus, which is our premium subscription tier for business leaders and China watchers. Special offer, we are providing an exclusive preview of the report to viewers of this webinar. Feel free to scan the QR code on the screen to access it. Once again, thank you for watching. See you next time.
Good show. Thanks. So, I'll go. Okay, bye-bye. See ya. Bye-bye.